We need hungrier talent. That's what he said. Not thank you, not goodbye, just that, hungrier talent. As if the 9 years I gave them were a snack. As if the long days, red-eye flights, and missed birthdays weren't enough to count as hunger. Brian Ellsworth didn't even look up from the folder in front of him. Just slid the termination papers across the conference table like it was a receipt. His tie was perfect. His watch caught the overhead light. The company is moving in a new direction, he added like a throwaway line. I stared at the papers. My name was printed at the top in bold, Darren McCabe, Senior Account Executive, like it was already obsolete. I didn't say anything at first. I was trying to keep my face neutral, professional, but I felt something twist low in my gut. Not rage, not yet, just disbelief, like watching your house burn down in slow motion while someone calmly explains fire safety. Defective. Immediately? I asked, even though I already knew the answer. He nodded. You'll have a 2-week severance package and continued benefits through the end of the month. HR will coordinate the rest. This isn't personal, Darren. It's strategic. Strategic. Right. I stood up and smoothed my tie. Then I guess we're done here. I didn't yell, didn't argue. There was no dignity in begging. If he thought I was dead weight, no PowerPoint was going to change his mind. As I walked out, I passed the glass wall that looked out over downtown Kansas City. I used to love this view. 9 years ago, when Everett Stanton hired me, I remember standing right there thinking, this is it. This is the job that matters. Back then, it had felt like arriving. Now, it felt like I'd overstayed my welcome in someone else's house. The hallway was quiet. Too quiet. I grabbed a cardboard box from the storage closet and walked back to my office. My nameplate was still on the door, though I doubted it would last the hour. I didn't have much to pack. A couple of framed photos, a travel mug my daughter painted when she was 9, and a leather folder I always kept under the desk drawer. Contacts, personal notes, handwritten relationship histories I'd kept out of the company database. Habit. Not spite. Julia wasn't at her desk. Of course not. She'd been reassigned last month. At the time, Brian called it a departmental shift. I told myself it was nothing. Just corporate churn. But I knew better now. The signs had been there. The desk relocation during renovations, getting dropped from pitch meetings I used to lead, travel requests suddenly needing VP approval, all of it was part of the quiet exile I didn't want to admit was happening. Was I blind? Or just too proud to see it? I slid the last drawer shut and stood for a moment, staring at the blank screen of my work monitor. Then I unplugged the power cord, coiled it neatly, and placed it in the box. Force of habit, still cleaning up even now. On my way to the elevator, Valerie from accounting passed by. She smiled, then paused. Hey, are you moving offices? Something like that, I said, managing a half smile. She nodded, still confused, and walked on. In the elevator, I stood alone with my box. Floors ticked down slowly. When the doors opened at the lobby, Everett Stanton, our CEO, stepped in. He nodded vaguely, not recognizing the weight in my hands or the shift in my expression. His eyes were glued to his phone. He had no idea what Brian had just done, or what it would mean. I didn't say a word. Outside, the air was cool, sharp, like a slap to the face that woke me up more than it hurt. I walked to my car, unlocked it with a click, and placed the box gently on the passenger seat. Then I just sat there, hands on the wheel, watching my reflection in the rearview mirror. No yelling, no begging, just a clean exit, and something in me clicking into place. The house was silent when I got home, not just quiet, silent. No dishwasher hum, no footsteps upstairs. Not even the distant buzz of a TV left on for background noise. Rebecca was in Denver for the week, helping her sister with the new baby. The timing was perfect, in the most inconvenient kind of way. I didn't have to explain the box in my hands, or the resignation in my voice, but I also didn't have anyone to talk to. No buffer, just me and the echo of everything I didn't want to think about. I set the box on the kitchen counter and stared at it like it might rearrange itself into something meaningful. The photo of our daughter's high school graduation was leaning sideways, wedged between the painted coffee mug and an old business card holder I hadn't used since 2016. The frame had a crack in one corner, an accidental drop during last year's move to the smaller house, the one closer to the airport. I told myself, it was more convenient for travel. Really, it was just more convenient for work. I picked up the mug. Dharma 1 Dad was written in purple and teal paint, the letters thick and clumsy with childhood effort. It was part of a Father's Day project her class did when she was in 3rd grade. I used to drink from it every Monday, my small ritual before client calls started rolling in. At some point, I stopped, switched to a sleeker stainless steel. Tumbler. More professional, more forgettable. The mug still had a faint coffee ring inside. I walked to the living room and sat down in the quiet. No TV, no music, just the ticking of the wall clock and the occasional distant bark from a neighbor's dog. It had been years since the house sounded this still. Normally, silence meant I was between trips, a few hours home before boarding another flight, just enough time to change shirts, reset the calendar, and kiss Rebecca on the cheek without asking too many questions. But tonight, there was nowhere to go. I reached into the box and pulled out the leather folder. It creaked faintly as I opened it. Inside was nearly a decade of handwritten notes. Client birthdays, kids' names, preferred restaurants, little things they'd mentioned once in passing that I made sure to remember. I'd kept this separate from the CRM system, part habit, part insurance. It wasn't malicious, it was personal. These weren't just accounts to me, they were people. I flipped to the H's, Hendris, Travis, CEO of Lockhart Manufacturing. We'd met at a lunch and learn in Minneapolis back in 2014, bonded over bad barbecue and a shared distaste for corporate jargon. Over the years, we'd built a real rapport, jokes, trust, real conversations. I'd helped his company navigate 2 mergers and a product recall. He called me when his daughter got accepted into Northwestern, not the company, me. Same story with Carlton Industries, Henderson Group, Westfield Properties. Different names. Same truth. I stared at the pages and felt a slow, unwelcome weight settle on my chest. Not regret. Not yet. But something like it. Like a question knocking gently, asking to be let in. Was it worth it? The nights I answered client emails from hotel bathrooms so Rebecca could sleep. The birthdays rescheduled. The ball games missed. I told myself it was for something, growth, legacy, stability. But what was I building if someone like Brian could take it all away with a single folder and a practiced HR phrase? I stood and walked back to the kitchen. The bourbon bottle was in the cabinet above the fridge. 2 fingers, no ice. The glass clinked softly as I set it down next to the folder. Outside, the streetlights flickered on. The house across the street had its porch lights decorated for Halloween. I didn't even realize it was October. I picked up the mug again. Number 1 Dad. The paint was chipped at the edges now. I turned it in my hand and set it on the windowsill above the sink. For the first time in years, I didn't check my email. I didn't open the company dashboard. Didn't sync my phone. Instead, I reached for my personal cell, the one no one at work had access to, and opened my contacts. The list was long. Over 200 names, vendors, executives, decision-makers, clients, people who didn't work with Trayvon. They worked with me. Looked at the glass of bourbon, then the list. Then back again, tomorrow, I thought. Tonight is just for remembering what I gave up, and what I might still have left. The bourbon burned going down. Not in a painful way, more like the burn of something real. Something honest after too many years of corporate coffee and synthetic cheer. I sat at the kitchen table, laptop open, the blue glow lighting up the dark. Rebecca's live laugh. Love wall plaque stared down at me like it knew I hated it. She'd insisted on it during the remodel 2 years ago. I never said anything, but it always felt like a silent rebuke to the pace I lived by. I opened my email, not the work one. That had been cut off the moment Brian handed me the folder. This was my personal inbox. Dozens of unread newsletters, Bill reminders and one flagged message from my attorney. An older exchange about the terms of my employment contract. I clicked through the PDF. There it was, in legal font and lawyerese. Non-compete clause. 12 months. Limited to direct competitors, but only enforceable upon voluntary departure. I hadn't left. I'd been fired. I sat back, let the chair creak beneath me. That single technicality meant I wasn't bound. They couldn't stop me from working, from calling, from keeping what I'd built, as long as I didn't misappropriate anything confidential. Not that I needed to. Everything that mattered was up here, and in here. I tapped the leather folder beside the laptop. I pulled up a spreadsheet I kept on my desktop. Nothing stolen, just a basic document I updated in my own time. Renewal dates. Contract terms, general notes. I didn't even include dollar amounts. Just what I needed to remember who was coming up for renewal, and when. Travis Friss, Henderson Group, Carlton Industries, all due for renewal in the next 30 days. All relationships built over years, all handled exclusively through me. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel vindicated. What I felt was stillness. For the first time in a long time, I had no deck to prepare, no morning flight to catch, no projection model to adjust based on Q4 trends, no pre-meeting with Brian about framing our narrative just this moment, and the quiet certainty that I knew what to do next. I got up and walked to the den where the family photos had been collecting dust in a box marked old frames. I hadn't hung them since we moved last fall. Said I was too busy. Truth was, I didn't want the constant reminder of what I'd missed. My son's wedding photo, my daughter's senior prom, a beach shot of Rebecca and me from before everything got serious. I wiped the glass with the sleeve of my shirt and placed them back along the hallway wall, one by one. This wasn't about nostalgia. It was a small act of reclaiming. If I was going to start over, I wasn't leaving those parts behind this time. Back at the table, I picked up my phone. I didn't scroll. Didn't open LinkedIn to post a cryptic update about next chapters. I just opened my contacts and stared at 3 names. Travis, James Henderson, Peter Carlton. 3 calls. Not to rant, not to recruit, just to inform. They deserved to hear it from me first, before Brian tried to shove someone new into the role. Before the narrative got rewritten, they'd ask what happened. I'd tell them the truth. Without spin, they'd decide for themselves. I took another sip of bourbon, slower this time. There would be no dramatic email blast, no scorched earth, just 3 calls and whatever followed. Well, that wouldn't be my doing, it would just be gravity. I looked at the clock. Nearly midnight. Too late to call now. Good. Let the night settle. Let me sleep for once without a red eye or a performance review hanging over my head. I turned off the light and stood in the doorway of the kitchen for a moment, taking in the quiet. The framed photos, the empty box, the bourbon glass with a single drop left at the bottom. Tomorrow, I'd make the calls. Just 3. That's all it would take. I didn't set an alarm that morning. For the first time in years, I let the sun pull me out of sleep instead of a calendar. Invite. I made coffee in the old drip machine, not the sleek pod system I'd upgraded to for time efficiency. The slower brew seemed appropriate. Everything about this morning needed to feel deliberate. I opened my phone and sat at the table. No distractions, no second guessing. First call, Travis Friss. He answered on the second ring. Darren? Hey, just thinking about you. You still good for dinner this week? Actually, that's why I'm calling, I said, voice steady. I won't be with Trevant anymore. As of yesterday, I've been let go. Silence. What? I just wanted to tell you directly. I don't know who they'll assign to your account, Brian or maybe Alicia. I figured you'd rather not hear it from an automated email. Another pause, then a long exhale. The girl from the meeting? Alicia? Yeah. She doesn't know our business. I know. Why'd they let you go? Ask Brian or Everett. He didn't say much more, just that he appreciated the heads up, that he'd think about some things. I didn't press. I didn't need to. Second call, James Henderson. He was in the middle of a strategy session, but picked up anyway. That told me everything. When I explained, he said, "You're kidding. They didn't even tell us we've got a renewal on the table." "I know, again, just wanted you to hear it from me." He was quiet for a moment. "This the same Brian who showed up late to our Q3 meeting and didn't know what we made?" "Yup. I'll be in touch," he said. The tone in his voice wasn't uncertain. It was decided. Third call. Peter Carlton. He didn't ask many questions, just said, "You've always been the reason we stuck with Trayvon. You go somewhere else. Let me know." That was it. No shouting, no fireworks, just shifts. The kind you feel but don't see until the foundation starts to crack. By noon, my phone buzzed with a call from Everett Stanton. I let it ring, then again, 30 minutes later. Voicemail this time. "Darren, it's Everett. We need to talk about your transition. Several clients are expressing concerns. Please call me back." I didn't need to. The rest would happen on its own. I had lunch on the porch, something I hadn't done in years. Just a sandwich, some sun, and the quiet hum of traffic down the street. Then the texts started rolling in. "Travis. They offered a 10% discount to keep us, said Alicia would personally handle the account." Me. "What did you say?" Travis. "Told them I'd think about it. Sent the termination notice 5 minutes later. I read it twice, no adrenaline. Just a strange, affirming calm. James Henderson and Carlton did the same. By the end of the day, 5 companies had withdrawn, without me asking for a thing. And still I said nothing. I didn't post online, didn't forward any messages, didn't brag or celebrate, because this wasn't revenge. It was the natural consequence of being the one person who had built real trust over 9 years while others focused on percentages and projections. That evening, I sat back in my chair, bourbon untouched this time, and opened a blank document on my laptop. Not a resume, not a business plan, just a list, a quiet, private list of every client who might call next. Because they weren't Trayvon's clients. Not really. They were mine. And someone at the top had finally realized it. My phone buzzed again. Everett. I ignored it again. They thought I was overhead. Turns out I was the foundation. It was late afternoon when Julia called. I didn't recognize the number at first. No caller ID, just 10 digits I hadn't dialed in months. But the voice on the other end brought it all rushing back. "Hey, it's Julia. I'm calling from a personal number." I sat up. "Hey, you all right?" "I shouldn't be calling," she said. Her voice was low, like she was hiding in a stairwell. "But you need to know what really happened." I didn't say anything, just waited. They're selling the company, or they were trying to. That got my attention. "To who?" "Veritas."
"Capital. It's been in the works for months."
The board brought Brian in to prep us for acquisition. I leaned back in my chair, the weight of it all finally catching up to me. "Why me?" "Because you were the problem," she said bluntly. "Not performance-wise. You were too good." I almost laughed. Too good. That's why they fired me. They wanted to de-risk the client base, Julia continued. That meant getting key accounts out of any one person's hands, especially yours. You had too much individual equity. Veritas didn't like that. Of course they didn't. Corporate buyers don't want people. They want systems. They want assets they can reshuffle and integrate. People like me, we're considered liabilities. Living proof that a spreadsheet can't tell you everything. I remembered Brian's first week, the way he hovered near my office, smiling too wide, talking like a guy who'd read too many leadership books but never led anything real. And then the changes started, Julia being reassigned, the travel approvals. Expense report audits, all of it done quietly, methodically, sanitizing the narrative. They weren't trying to fix the business. They were trying to rewrite it, remove me from the center and turn those relationships into clean line items. "I saw the documents," Julia said. "The transition plans, there were internal slides labeling you as a single point of failure." That one stung. "I'm sorry, Darren, I should have warned you earlier." "No," I said, rubbing my forehead. "You did what you had to do." A pause. "Also, Veritas just pulled the offer. They backed out. I blinked. What? They found out about the client exodus. The numbers don't work now. It's chaos here. Brian's panicking. Everett's losing it. They didn't expect your accounts to walk so fast. I let out a slow breath. The company I built nearly half, gutted by its own arrogance. Thanks for telling me, I said. I figured you'd rather hear it from someone who still gives a damn. We hung up. I sat in the quiet again. But this time it felt different. Not empty. Just exposed. Like all the lights had been turned on in a room I didn't know I was in. I went back through every moment with Brian. Every awkward meeting. Every time he inserted Alicia into my client conversations like she was casually learning the ropes. It wasn't mentorship. It was succession. One I wasn't supposed to notice until it was too late. And I didn't. Not fully. That part hurt. The most, not the firing, not the loss of status or salary, but the realization that I'd been surgically removed like a bad part by people I'd trusted to care about what we were building. This wasn't about numbers. It was never about underperformance. It was about control. They didn't want my clients. They wanted client ownership, without me. But that's not how relationships work. You don't get to inherit trust. You earn it. I looked down at the leather folder still sitting beside my laptop. I didn't need to call anyone else. They were already calling me. Emails, texts, referrals. People I hadn't spoken to in a year were asking where I was landing, who I was working with. Not because they were being loyal, but because I made their lives easier. And that still mattered. I closed my laptop, leaned back, stared at the ceiling for a long time, then said it out loud, soft but certain. I wasn't let go. I was eliminated. The next morning I had 6 voicemails. 3 were from Everett, 2 from Brian, 1 from an unfamiliar number that I suspected was legal. I didn't listen to any of them. By the end of the day, 8 clients had terminated their contracts with Trayvont. Hadn't asked them to, I hadn't even followed up, they just left. And not one of them sounded angry when they called or texted me. They sounded tired of being treated like transactions, tired of new names they hadn't agreed to, tired of being reassured by people who didn't know their business and didn't bother to ask. The market, as it turned out, was speaking on my behalf. That evening I took a call from Michael Grantley, CEO of Grantley & Company. We'd crossed paths years ago at a financial summit. Back then, they were a scrappy boutique firm. Now, they were growing, fast and smart. Client-first culture, real relationship management. I've heard some things, he said without preamble. I imagine you have. Would you be open to a conversation? I didn't hesitate. I'm listening. The offer wasn't just generous, it was intentional. Senior vice president, signing bonus, full autonomy, executive committee seat, equity track. We don't want your clients, he clarified. We want you. If they follow, that's their choice. That line stuck with me. Because it was the opposite of everything Trayvont had done. They'd tried to take the clients and leave the relationship. Grantley wanted to protect the relationship regardless of where the clients landed. I accepted on the spot. Not out of ego, not out of vengeance, out of clarity. I packed up my things, what little I hadn't already unpacked emotionally, and walked into my new office 3 days later. It was bright, modest, real. 2 assistants, dedicated marketing support, a budget I controlled, no motivational posters, no fake culture walls, just trust. That afternoon, Brian sent another text. Board approved a 6-month consulting retainer, full salary, plus stock options. We just need help transitioning the accounts. I didn't respond. He had 9 years to value what I built. Now he was trying to buy back what he'd thrown away. Too late. I didn't need revenge. I had results. The next day, Grantley's legal team received a vague cease and desist letter from Trayvont's counsel, thinly veiled threats about client poaching and proprietary information. Our attorney responded with 2 words. He was fired. End of conversation. Everett left another voicemail that week. This one sounded different. No longer commanding. More unmoored. Darren, I think we both know this isn't what anyone wanted. Can we meet? Just you and me. No lawyers. Still, I didn't respond. What would we talk about? How he'd sold me out for a smoother acquisition. How he let Brian tear apart the thing we built together because it looked cleaner in a prospectus. I wasn't angry anymore. I just didn't have anything left to say. Instead, I threw myself into the work, but not the way I used to. I didn't bury myself in endless hours. I didn't sacrifice weekends to win another percentage point. I designed the work, picked my clients, built systems around trust, not control, created shared dashboards, weekly personal check-ins instead of quarterly reports, and the results were immediate. Clients felt it. They told me, and then they told their peers. Grantley signed 3 new accounts in the first week after my arrival, all former Travant clients. Not a single one required persuasion. They'd just been waiting to see where I landed. Now that they knew, they followed. Not because I asked, but because they knew what they were getting. That Friday, I sat in my new corner office, larger than the one I'd been pushed out of, and looked out at the Kansas City skyline. Same view, different altitude, different air. They thought they could bury me, but all they did was clear the ground, and the market, it was building something better in the space they abandoned. 3 weeks into my role at Grantley, I got the invitation, Midwest Financial Services Conference. Panel topic: Building Client Loyalty in a Transactional Market. The irony practically dripped off the screen. Everett never missed this conference. Neither did the board. I almost declined. It felt unnecessary, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized this wasn't about ego. This was about clarity and truth, spoken plainly, had a way of landing harder than any vendetta. So I accepted. I didn't rehearse sound bites. Didn't plan to name names. I spent nights working with my analysts instead. We pulled real numbers from the past 30 days, service metrics, transition data, satisfaction scores, nothing flashy. Just the facts. When the morning of the conference arrived, I wore a simple navy suit and carried no slides, just a notebook with 3 client profiles and a quiet confidence in what I'd learned. The hotel ballroom buzzed with low conversation and soft jazz from the sound system. Industry leaders, department heads, analysts scribbling notes, and near the coffee station I spotted Everett Stanton, flanked by 2 board members. He was thinner, grayer. His smile when he noticed me didn't reach his eyes. I nodded politely and walked past. The panel began with warm-ups, questions about automation, retention strategies, and client churn. The usual dance, then the moderator turned to me. Darren, you've had a recent transition. What's your perspective on building long-term client loyalty in the current climate? I kept it simple. In an age of automation, the rarest commodity is personal accountability, I said. Loyalty doesn't come from perks or dashboards. It comes from being known, heard, prioritized. I paused. Clients don't care about your internal org chart. They care about whether someone will pick up the phone when things go sideways, and whether that person remembers what they said the last time they called. I shared 3 anonymized case studies. Clients who had switched firms after years with their previous provider. Never said Travant. I never said Brian. I didn't have to. The numbers did the talking. Average service response time reduced by 53%. Implementation costs down 30%. Client satisfaction up 22 points. I made eye contact with the crowd as I closed my notebook. The lesson here isn't about contracts or software, I said. It's about people. When companies treat relationship managers like interchangeable cogs, clients will show you just how wrong that assumption is. A ripple of nods moved through the room. Then came the question, from a young analyst in the back, hesitant but brave. Isn't your recent move the exact reason companies worry about giving too much autonomy to individual account managers? I could feel Everett watching me from across the ballroom. I let the silence stretch just long enough, then replied, "That's a fair question. But maybe the real issue isn't autonomy. Maybe it's misunderstanding what clients actually value, because in my experience, they don't follow people out of blind loyalty. I leaned forward. They follow because their needs are better met, because trust isn't transferable, and because automation can't remember a client's daughter's name or what keeps their CFO up at night. Quiet, and then applause. Not a thunderclap, not dramatic. Just real. The way honest things land when they've been missing too long. After the panel, 3 former Trevant clients approached me. One already had a letter of intent drawn up. Another wanted a meeting the following week. By the time I got back to my office, our intake team had logged $2.7 million in new potential revenue, just from that one morning. Later that night, I checked the financial news. Trevant's stock had dropped another 8%. The Veritas deal, officially dead. Brian, pursuing other opportunities, according to the company's restructuring memo. I didn't feel triumphant. There was no fist pump, no toast, just the deep, steady feeling that comes when everything you've said, everything you believed, gets validated by the only metric that ever really matters: choice. The market had spoken, not with flair, but with precision. And loyalty? It followed me, not because I asked, but because I'd earned it. 1 year to the day after Brian slid those termination papers across that polished conference table, I signed the final documents making me a full partner at Grantley & Company. The office was quiet that morning. My assistant had brought in coffee, real, black and hot, no branding or slogans. On the desk sat a slim manila folder. Inside, signatures, agreements, equity allocations, and a snapshot. Percent company growth since I arrived. My client portfolio now accounted for nearly $20 million in annual revenue. But that wasn't the number that mattered most to me. 3 new hires had started last week. Sharp, curious, respectful people who didn't just want a paycheck. They wanted to build. And I'd made sure they had a profit-sharing structure from day one. If they brought in business, they'd own a piece of it. No one here would ever build something just to have it taken away. That was my first act as partner. A soft ping drew my attention to my inbox. It was a name I hadn't seen in a while. Alicia Winters. Hi, Darren. I hope this finds you well. I've been let go from Trevant along with most of the sales team. I know we didn't exactly start off on the right foot, but if you're hiring, I'd appreciate the chance to talk. Alicia stared at the screen for a long second. She hadn't done anything wrong. She'd been thrown into a role she wasn't ready for, and handed a sinking ship with a fake smile and a discount contract. I forwarded the email to HR with a note. Worth interviewing. Not her fault what happened. That was it. No grudges. Just a clean ledger. Later that afternoon, as I was packing up to leave, my assistant handed me a thick envelope that had been couriered over. No return address, just my name in black ink. Inside was a handwritten note. Darren, you were right. I put transaction above relationship, and it cost the company everything. If you're ever willing to have coffee, I'd appreciate the chance to apologize in person. Everett. I folded the note and placed it in my jacket pocket. Maybe someday, not yet. On the drive home, I passed Trevant's old building. The signage was gone. Just faded outlines where the letters used to be. The Business Journal had reported they were downsizing. New office in the suburbs, half the staff, no acquisition. I didn't slow down, didn't take a photo, didn't smile. That chapter was closed. Rebecca was waiting for me at home, dressed for the evening. She handed me a program from our son's high school. You ready? His band's opening the spring concert. I looked at her, really looked at her. She smiled like she used to before business trips and late-night slide decks took up all my good hours. We drove in silence for a while. Comfortable, calm. At the school, I took my seat beside her and felt the auditorium fill with chatter and laughter and student nerves. Then the music started. Not perfect, not polished, but real. And I was there to hear every note. As the lights dimmed for the closing number, I reached for her hand. No PowerPoints, no projections, just a quiet promise to myself, never again. I'd built something worth protecting. Not for prestige, not to prove a point, but because some fires don't just destroy, they burn away what needs to go. And this time, I was building something no one could take from me.